Hey everyone, Rua here with my next job guide. Paladins have been Vana'diel's quintessential tanks since its earliest times, slipping in and out of vogue as the meta has shifted back and forth. Paladins are the archetypical sword and board holy knights, fully clad in heavy armour with extensive spiritual training at their disposal and their mastery of shields. A paladin uses all the spells and abilities it has to be its group's barrier in the face of danger. As I just mentioned, Paladin has hopped in and out of the spotlight, so many are likely wondering where it stands today. This is something I've gone over on this channel before, but this time around was focusing solely on Paladin itself. A Paladin's combat and magic skills are well suited to its role as a tank and a support healer. Paladins are master swordsmen and have unmatched skill with a shield. Clubs, staves and greatswords also feature in its repertoire, as they have great skill in these weapon classes even if they do not see as much use as its two headliner skills. To round out its status as a holy knight, Paladins have great skill in divine magic, and adequate skill in both healing and enhancing magic. While a Paladin's spell selection is relatively small, they make very good use of what they have when they are most needed. A list of Paladin's strengths has to start at its sheer durability against physical damage. The only jobs which can come remotely close to it in this category all come with sizable caveats, whereas with a Paladin the defense comes with it pretty much out the door. Thanks to recent updates, Paladins are now able to extend some of this defense to its allies. It's not just physical damage a Paladin is durable against, as with the Eager shield and proper use of its abilities to compensate, the job practically becomes an immovable object in the way of danger. If things get truly dire, then a Paladin can always be relied on to hold the line and keep itself in the fight. Underlining this is the fact that Paladins have the highest potential HP of all tank jobs, and the highest potential among all jobs in the game save for a few outliers. This helps Paladin keep the enmity loss to a bare minimum. Speaking of enmity loss, Paladins also have two abilities which suppress it, one which does it entirely and the other which comes very close. This is something no other tank job has in their toolkit. Outright enmity suppression is something only Paladin has. Going from one exclusivity to another, Paladins are also the only tank job capable of directly reducing the enmity gained by its party members by using cover's secondary effect. This is something only Paladin can do, and is an absolute godsend in lengthier battles when DPS start hitting the enmity ceiling. On that note, this ability also effectively prevents a Paladin from losing control of its target if it's hit with an enmity reset, as covering the new target will help regain control. If things are getting hectic in a battle, Paladins can be relied on as very effective frontline healers, casting powerful Curaga spells to keep the group standing, but also to help its enmity gain. With a dedicated cure set, you'd be very surprised to see just how strong this is. The update which gave Paladins the ability to cast Curaga spells was also an indirect buff to Scholar, Red Mage and Summoner, in that it compensated for those jobs' collective weakness of lacking reliable or readily available Curaga spells of their own. A Paladin being a group's tank means that the option to bring one of these three jobs in a slot most would reserve for a White Mage becomes viable. These jobs bring a lot more utility and support to a group than a White Mage can, and, subject to the content in question, will result in a better overall performance. Paladins are very strong against undead, with their Holy Circle and Sepulchre abilities going the distance against what seems to be a frequent monster type. It's the closest thing to a DPS buff the job gets, and in the situations you can use them, you will notice them. Rounding out its arsenal, a Paladin's Enlight II spell has a hidden effect the spell's description does not tell you. It also increases accuracy, by a lot actually, with a dedicated divine magic build. Enlight helps a Paladin maintain a high accuracy stat even against the highest level targets, invaluable when you need TP. On a final note, and while we're on weapon skills, Paladins have all 4 level 2 skill chain properties available on its sword, effectively making it a great skill chain opener for DPS. It has 2 options for fusion, 2 for gravitation, 1 for fragmentation and 1 for distortion. The options are there and it's down to the group to make the most of them. It's a good thing that Paladins have the option of opening skill chains for DPS because their own damage is pretty lackluster, especially compared to a veteran Rune Fencer. Paladins can do decent damage if they really go out of their way, potentially hamstringing other aspects of their role in the process, but even then it's nowhere near as effective as what a good Rune Fencer can do. Compounding this further is the fact that Paladin lacks any form of DPS support, unless Cure Support and Rampart can qualify when DPS go full throttle. Moving on to a myriad of core issues is that Paladins have very low innate magic evasion, which leaves it vulnerable to being buried in status ailments. Most seasoned tank players will agree that ailments are just as, if not more dangerous than outright damage, and against the highest level content this will become very apparent very quickly. Paladins do have some good magic evasion equipment, but it's very hard to come by, let alone get the entire set for. Be ready for a lot of divergence, windurst, and competition to get the Vault Horbert set if you're really set on it. While status ailments can be removed by others or by the player themselves with a remedy or panacea, being hit with an ailment in mid-battle can stop a paladin in their tracks. It can only restore HP, it cannot remove status ailments. Among these ailments, the two which will really shoot the treads off this tank are Plague and Aspir, those which directly attack its precious MP reserve. A paladin's HP might make it a brick wall, but its MP is vulnerable. It has a few emergency repair tools to descend, but if sustained, a paladin will find itself in trouble without outside MP restoral support. Something else which will throw players used to Rune Fencer if they come to Paladin is the difference in casting speed. Paladins lack native fast cast, and while they do have a lot of gear with it, the vast majority of it cannot be used without causing one's HP to slingshot back and forth, something you really cannot afford on dangerous content. Most of Paladin's spells have short casting times as is, but for some of them you're really reliant on being magic haste capped or you're going to have a very tough time of it. Going off on a slight but relevant tangent here, but the lack of fast cast and native Aqua Veil will also likely prove frustrating for new players. This can be alleviated with proper gear, but it is a problem to know coming in. I know the Rune Fencer comparisons keep coming up, but there's simply no getting away from them, as it is the better known tank in the current meta. Paladin does have decent magic defense in the form of Rampart, but it pales in comparison to Valiance and One for All when looking to mitigate massive magic damage for your group. Rampart brings its own benefit to the group, but if you're looking for magic defense, this isn't it. Paladins can be made to resist magic-based tank busters with the Aegis shield, but the Aegis only protects itself. While a Paladin extends physical defenses to its party, a Rune Fencer will do the opposite and defend against magic. Logical from a design perspective, but it's still worth mentioning. That may have made sense, but these last two detractors are down to some dubious design. Paladins can struggle to hold enmity on multiple targets, since its means of doing so are either from abilities which cannot be used repeatedly, or tied to a certain sub-job and limited to 2 spells. This is because cure spells generate substantially less enmity for the caster when they have enmity registered on multiple targets. This was implemented to help white mages avoid dying so much from casting Curaga spells, but unfortunately it also means that Paladin got hit in the process. The second concerns cover. Cover is a brilliant ability, but its inability to work across an alliance and be targeted on DPS in other parties makes absolutely no sense. If you're familiar with endgame alliance configurations, you'll know that there is typically one designated tank party and 1 to 2 other parties for DPS. You see the problem here. For alliance content, one of Paladin's unique strengths is completely neutered. Paladin merits vary slightly depending on the situation your group finds itself in. Group 1 is best dedicated to maxing out the reuse timers of Sentinel and Rampart. As tempting as it may be to go for Shield Bash, don't. Sentinel and Rampart are far more important abilities for overall effectiveness, and getting their reuse timers down will serve you better in the long run. Holy Circle is worth going for if fighting undead in a capacity points party, so if you're going to Rakazna in a court, go for it, but be sure to change it back after. Group 2 is best used on maxing out the Guardian trait, getting the most out of fealty while also keeping Chivalry available as an emergency MP restoral. Iron Will might seem tempting, but with proper equipment its effect is rendered useless. I know I just said that spell interruption is a problem for new paladins as they find their feet, but still, you cannot full-time Rampart, and relying on something which isn't a constant isn't a good idea. You can merit it until you get said equipment to compensate, but don't rely on it too much even if you do. You need to wean yourself off of it as soon as possible. Aside from these two groups, make sure you have merits invested in your main combat skills, attributes, spell interruption rate down, and optionally enemy critical hit rate down. I went over enmity mechanics extensively in a previous video you should be seeing the link for in the top right hand corner of this one right now. Be sure to familiarise yourself with them before getting to endgame on Paladin, or on any tank for that matter, as you need to know how enmity generation and retention works. Being a top tier tank demands you know how Enmity works, as all the best gear around won't help you one bit if you cannot hold your target's attention. Paladin has more to offer its group in the event it does lose control of the target than other tanks. Sometimes things just go wrong, but knowing how to get back in control as soon as possible is central to your role. The first thing we need to go over is the fact that all shields have two hidden attributes, damage reduction and block rate. These two attributes are determined by the size of the shield. There are 6 sizes of shield, and Paladin only generally uses 3 of them, size 3, 5 and 6. Size 3 accounts for kite shields, size 5 covers REMA shields like the Aegis and the Sravatsta, while size 6 only covers one shield, the Empyrean shield, the O-Chain. In addition to the base block rates, the block percentage is enhanced by the amount of shield skill the Paladin has above your current level shield skill, so the higher skill you have, the more chance you'll have of blocking. In addition to your shield skill, your block percentage is also affected by the level of what you're fighting. This acts as a penalty, reducing block chance by 1.5% per level difference. On top of all this, the defense value of the shield also plays a significant role in how much damage it mitigates when you successfully block, as does the shield defense bonus trait. Shield defense affects the PDIF ratio when calculating damage reduction, while the shield defense bonus trait has a static damage reduction when blocking. The final thing to know about shields is that the shield mastery job trait gives bonus TP for blocking an attack. Shield mastery will also prevent spell interruption if you block while casting, but don't rely on it. Invincible is Paladin's first SP and it's very straightforward. When activated, Invincible renders the Paladin completely immune to physical damage for 30 seconds, 40 seconds with JSE. Invincible also generates a massive amount of volatile and cumulative enmity as well, with job points invested to help with enmity control, which is really its main draw given how sturdy a Paladin already is without it. With a good enmity build used for its activation, you can potentially make Invincible give over 21,000 volatile and 6,000 cumulative enmity in a single shot. Pretty amazing. Shield Bash is an instantaneous stun ability with a mercifully reduced reuse timer to what it once was. Its stun rate is not 100%, but it's pretty accurate, and since some of the pieces you use with it will have magic accuracy on them, it's very rare to not see it successfully stun something, unless the target is a complete resistance to it. If you do not need Shield Bash to intercept a certain special attack or spell from your target, it has very good base enmity values, so it's useful as a tool to help build enmity at the start of a battle. If you're using the Reforged Relic Gauntlets for it, which you really should go out of your way to get, Shield Bash gains an additional effect of an unresistible dispel, great for knocking any bust a target has given itself off. Sentinel is one of Paladin's best abilities. Sentinel gives a colossal physical damage taken reduction which bypasses the hard cap of 87.5%. The effect starts at 128% reduction when maxed out with JSC and decays at a rate of 8% per 3 seconds until it reaches 50% reduction, where it stays until Sentinel wears off. Sentinel has 2 other effects. It gives the Paladin an extra 100 enmity while active, and if Guardian is merited, it also suppresses 90% of enmity loss. Sentinel's duration can be increased to 40 seconds with Guardian merited and the Reforged Relic leggings used during activation. Sentinel's best use is when you are starting a potentially dangerous but short battle and need to generate a massive amount of enmity quickly and hold it to keep your group's DPS safe. With the enmity boost it brings, a Paladin can be guaranteed to have the enmity generation on all of its spells and abilities tripled, since you are easily hitting the 200 enmity cap with it. Palisade is the second of Paladin's enmity suppression abilities. It increases block rate by 30%, 50% with job points, regardless of the size of the shield and regardless of the level of the target, essentially making it Paladin's equivalent of a Rune Fencer's Batuta. Lasting a whole minute, Palisade completely suppresses the Paladin's enmity loss regardless of any damage it takes, if any attacks make it through to do substantial damage. Unlike Sentinel though, Palisade does not increase enmity while active, so your DPS can still overtake you and get the target's attention off you. It does have very good enmity built into it, but if your DPS are hitting too hard, you can still lose your target's attention, rendering Palisade moot. Rampart, however, does defend those in your party. Rampart received a major buff a few months ago and it's a lot stronger than it once was. Rampart gives all party members it hits a 25% damage taken reduction, which bypasses the 50% cap on equipment. Rampart will last a whole minute when used with the Reforged Relic Coronet, and this, coupled with its generous reuse timer, which can be brought down to 2 minutes and 40 seconds, meaning it can be used 1 minute and 40 seconds after it expires. For potentially dangerous phases of a battle, Rampart will literally save lives, transferring some of a Paladin's durability to its party members. Two other things to know about Rampart. First is that although its base enmity seems low, that number multiplies by the players affected. So if you get your entire party with it, it will be increased 5-fold and it becomes a solid generator. Second is that its damage taken reduction is universal, so it works on absolutely all forms of damage, making it Paladin's best response to massive AoE magic damage, especially from repeat attacks. Rampart is not as strong as One for All for magic damage, but it's still decent. It can be used twice as often. It seems a pretty good trade-off. Cover is Paladin's most underused and underrated ability. Cover causes the Paladin to take physical damage in place of the person the ability is used on, provided they are standing between them and the target. When used with the artifact Coronet, Cover will also intercept magic and ranged attacks, but it only needs to be worn for the activation to get this effect. Cover has a secondary effect, however, one the in-game description of the ability does not tell you. When taking damage in place of the person being covered, and provided they are currently above the Paladin on the monster's enmity list, each hit the Paladin intercepts increases their cumulative enmity by 200, and reduces the covered person's cumulative enmity by 10%. Cover is the only ability in the game available to a tank job which can erase a party member's built up enmity in this manner. It will not defend the covered person against conal or AoE attacks, but that's what Rampart is for. Majesty reduces the recast timer of all a Paladin's cure spells and forces them to become AoE, turning them into Curaga spells. It also turns a Paladin's Protect spells into AoE versions, but more on that later. Better yet, Majesty increases cure potency by 25%, which will break the 50% cure potency cap on equipment if already reached. This means that a Paladin actually has an easier time than any other mage, White Mage included, in reaching the cure potency cap. Having such powerful Curaga spells available and able to be used endlessly provided the Paladin is being supported, means that Majesty serves another function as a great enmity generator. What I just mentioned with Rampart multiplying its generation depending on the number of players it affects also applies here, but in this instance Majesty cure spells can be made to work across an alliance by simply casting on one party member in another party. It will then land on all players in that party. If you can cure multiple party members for even decent amounts, then the enmity generation will be massive, provided you've spec'd a cure build to incorporate enmity. If you're spamming cures on entire parties, especially if that party's White Mage is down, then not only will you save their lives, but you'll make sure you will not lose your target's attention anytime soon. Having just heaped praise on Majesty and on Paladin's impressive curing power with it, there are several catches. The first is the most obvious. You actually need to be able to cure people for substantial amounts to make it as incredible as it can be, which isn't going to be easy since White Mages are not going to lose their reflexes anytime soon. Secondly, if you're getting hit with ailments which impede your casting, which is pretty likely, then that will stop you in your tracks. Thirdly, enmity from curing is heavily reduced when the player has enmity registered on multiple targets, dividing the final enmity amount between the number of targets the Paladin has enmity registered on. Overall though, Majesty is another one of Paladin's best abilities and can be literally what saves the day if things are going downhill. An ability which alleviates all the concerns about status ailments landing at the wrong moment is Fealty. Fealty gives the Paladin an extremely powerful resistance against enfeebling magic, enfeebling effects on monster special attacks, charm, and some forms of non-elemental magic damage like Meteor. It also has a decent duration when merited, and when the Reforged Relic Surcoat is used during activation. Ione lasts 1 minute and 36 seconds. While Fealty is active, the Paladin can be rest assured that no ailment is going to land, but it does have two glaring weak spots. It has a very prohibitive reuse timer, 10 minutes, so it will be down for roughly 8 minutes after it wears off. Fealty does not prevent dispel attacks from landing either, so it will not prevent a full dispel, and if it gets removed by a single or multiple dispel, then the Paladin is wide open again to ailments landing. I recommend keeping Fealty ready for pivotal moments of a battle where you absolutely cannot afford to be hit with status ailments. The group's healer being incapacitated would be a very good instance. Chivalry is a get out of trouble ability to be used if you have somehow and suddenly run out of MP. Chivalry instantly converts a Paladin's TP to MP in a roughly 2-to-1 ratio. Given how many MP restoral sources there are in today's game, Chivalry hasn't aged well since the 75 cap days, but it's still worth putting at least one merit into. You never know when you might need an emergency MP charge. Divine Emblem is a neat ability which mercifully had its reuse timer brought down to 3 minutes, which has greatly improved its practicality. Divine Emblem has 2 possible applications. It will increase the enmity generated by the next divine magic spell, namely Flash, by 50%, 65% when the Empyrean Sabatons are used. This 65% is applied in a separate step from other enmity calculations, so it's possible to use a Flash spell at a value which breaks the 200% cap, resulting in a pretty hefty enmity spike from it. Divine Emblem is best used under Sentinel to really amplify its effect in this manner, but there is a second feature. Divine Emblem will also increase the damage dealt by the next divine magic spell, so you can get it to make Holy 2 do some pretty solid damage, especially when you magic burst it with a top tier set. I've gotten some pretty hilarious reactions from people in Omen when they see a Paladin do the 15k non-burst and the 30k burst objectives. Made it worth putting the set together just for that. Holy Circle and Sepulchre are Paladin's 2 anti-undead abilities. Both work exactly like their counterparts found on Dark Knight, Dragoon and Samurai. Holy Circle gives a 17% damage dealt bonus to party attacks against undead, a 17% damage taken reduction to party members when being attacked by undead, and a 17% chance to outright cancel incoming attacks through an intimidation effect. These effects are all lowered against NMs, but are still well worth using, especially if DPS are using multi-hit weapon skills. Sepulchre inflicts a static -20 to undead accuracy, evasion, magic accuracy and magic evasion, and also to their store TP. It's the store TP reduction which is really significant, especially if you have a monk in your group. Undead show up surprisingly often in endgame content, so you're going to see a fair bit of mileage out of these 2 abilities I found. Intervene is a Paladin's second SP ability, and it's got some very good uses. Intervene is the analogue of a Rune Fencer's Idyllic Subterfuge in that it floors the target's accuracy in attack, rendering their physical damage crippled for 30 seconds. Intervene is the ideal ability to use if a dangerous target prone to resetting enmity is about to go on a rampage. Simply hit it with Intervene and you will buy your group 30 seconds to get things back under control, or for them to get their defenses up as you do. Intervene is also a great counter to dangerous enemy SP abilities like 100 Fists and especially Mighty Strikes. Enemy special attacks under Mighty Strikes can seriously hurt and potentially wipe entire groups. Considering that Rampart does not work across an alliance, Intervene is a Paladin's best response to major physical danger beyond its own party. Moving on to spells now, we best start with Reprisal. Reprisal does 3 things. It increases your shield skill by 15% of its current value, increases your current block rate by 50%, and reflects a small amount of the damage you take when blocking back onto your target. Reprisal is not the same as Palisade, which is a guaranteed block rate increase regardless of all other factors. Reprisal only increases your current block rate. Reprisal can wear off before its duration expires if enough damage is reflected, so when you cast it, you're going to want to pile on HP, allowing for fast cast wherever you can. With Cat Magic Haste, it's feasible to keep Reprisal up full time. Reprisal spike damage does not affect super tanking, as the spikes do not register the Paladin on the target's enmity list if no other actions have been taken. It's something of an oddity in that regard, but it's welcome. Reprisal is a brilliant spell, but I should reiterate to you that you need to be magic haste capped to get the recast timer down, or that 3 minutes is going to hurt. If you're coming to Paladin from Rune Fencer, then you should already know what Phalanx does. but in case you're not, here's a quick rundown. Phalanx reduces damage taken by a static amount. It stacks with shield defense bonus, so when you block an attack you'll really notice it, as you'll take no damage whatsoever. Phalanx's baseline damage reduction is nothing special, but Paladin gets a lot of pieces which directly increase its effect, 4 of which are very easy to get, and 3 you are unfortunately going to have to play the Dark Matter Augment slot machine to get. It's well worth going out of your way to get the Edison armor with the enhancement on, but you can get by with the 2 Sovereign pieces, the Weighted Mantle and the Prelude if starting fresh. Enlight II is a spell you'll get shortly after you start getting job points on Paladin, once you reach the 100 mark. Enlight II's description says that it just adds light damage to your attacks, but this is misleading. It actually has a hidden effect that also increases accuracy, by a lot as well with a dedicated divine magic build. The light damage and the accuracy bonus decrease with 1 with each attack the Paladin lands, but given its very short recast timer relative to this penalty, keeping it close to full power is very easy. You'll be pleasantly surprised to see just how much accuracy a Paladin can maintain in a full-on tanking build with Enlight II and a food bonus. It makes TP gain very easy and less risky by not forcing you into a set lacking such defensive attributes. Shield Barrier is a job trait which increases the strength of a Paladin's protect spells proportional to the defense stat of the shield it has equipped at time of casting. Majesty also forces protect spells cast to become AoE, so they can be used on the Paladin's entire alliance, much like its cure spells can. Shield Barrier means that a Paladin's Protect 5 will blow a White Mage's Protect 5 out of the water, provided the right shield is being used. The Prelude or the Srivatsta will both suffice. Protect 5 and Majesty Protect 5 overwrite each other, despite a Paladin's version being stronger, so communicate that with your White Mage if you have one, or several around. While we're on the subject of shields, let's go over some you should be using. The first shield you should pick up once at level 99 is the Prelude. Obtained from Oboro in Port Juno, the Prelude is really something for what seems like an entry-level shield. It has great attributes with a solid base defense, shield skill, HP, damage taken reduction, a phalanx bonus, and it's the only shield I know of which has magic evasion on it. The real draw of the Prelude, what makes it retain its usefulness well beyond the point you get it, is that it triples the block rate enhancement of Reprisal. As good as it is, the Prelude unfortunately has a very big weak spot, and it's not that obvious. If you are not magic haste capped, being hit with slow and addle effects, or are weakened and have lengthy recast timers, the Prelude falls behind majorly. It is very reliant on Reprisal being active. Still, the Prelude will serve you very far well beyond the point you first get it. Next we have the famous Aegis, the Relic Shield. The Aegis is noted for its stellar magic defenses. You can be rest assured that magic damage will not be a threat with the Aegis, but sadly it has not aged well, especially with the recent adjustment to Rampart. Let me explain. Since the damage taken reduction of Rampart breaks the equipment cap of 50%, and since it applies to both physical and magic damage, the Aegis has lost some of its claim to fame. The Aegis will still provide a higher degree of defense against magic, but you're not exclusively facing magic damage in endgame, you're facing both. And this is where the Aegis falls badly short. You see, the Aegis has absolutely no shield skill on it, so its block rate is abysmal on anything high level. This is something veteran Paladins vent about often, and it might be patched at some point, but for now, it is what it is. The Srivatsta has undergone a revival with updates. Once considered worthless, this Aeonic shield now has reasons to be used. The Srivatsta has the highest defense, shield skill and HP on any shield, with some damage taken reduction, accuracy and enmity rounding it out. As a final touch, it also has a 5% chance of completely negating any incoming damage. The Srivatsta is a size 5 shield like the Aegis, but unlike the Aegis, the Srivatsta actually has shield skill, giving it more utility than just mitigating magic damage. Since Reprisal increases shield skill by 15%, the Srivatsta will get the most shield skill from it, but the Prelude will still have a better block rate with Reprisal active. I'm very fond of the Srivatsta, but I admit it is a hard sell and will take some convincing. It's worth getting when you're further along the road and your equipment progression can help make the most of it. The last shield to speak of is the Oddchain. The Oddchain is the Emperor's shield, and while I do not have it myself, having gotten by comfortably without it, it's still well worth talking about. The Oddchain lacks shield skill or good defense, but it's the only size 6 shield around, which means it has an absolutely insane base block rate, far beyond any other shield out there. I understand it's possible to achieve a 100% block rate with it, but again, I'm not speaking from personal experience here. The Oddchain is the inverse of the Aegis when you think about it, providing stellar defense against physical attacks, but it does nothing against magic damage like the others we have spoken of. Your tanking builds will therefore inevitably differ when using the Oddchain than they will to using the Srivatsta, just to use one example. The Oddchain is brilliant, unbeatable for physical damage mitigation by many accounts, but you can get by without it with enough know-how. Work towards it eventually, but don't let not having it put you off trying. While we're here, we might as well go over some good entry-level swords as well. The first sword you're likely going to get is the Nixer. Obtained from Eshka Ruan or from 200 domain invasion points if you want to take the path of least resistance, the Nixer is a solid starting point for a new Paladin. It increases your block rate by 3%, physical damage taken by 6%, and is one of the 2 pieces Paladin has which increases the TP gained from the Shield Mastery trait. Since you're probably going to be using it alongside the Prelude, you're going to get some good mileage out of that extra TP from blocking. When used with the Reforged Artifact Gauntlets as well, you're looking at 80 additional TP from a block when using the Nixer. Depending on what you're fighting and how many targets you're fighting, that number can quickly add up. You should pick up the Nixer and keep it handy, you're probably going to get a lot of use out of it. The Malignant Sword is from the Maiden of the Dusk high tier battlefield, colloquially known as the Lilith BC. Some might have looked at this sword and passed over it, but you really ought to give it a second and closer look. Sure, it lacks any form of physical damage reduction, but its other stats are decent. It has higher accuracy than the Nixer, more vitality and mind to help with cure potency, and magic defense bonus to help mitigate magic damage. Its main appeal is that it has the highest fast cast on a sword available to a Paladin, speeding up your casting time and reducing the recast timers of crucial spells like Flash and Reprisal. Finally, the Malignant Sword is also the only sword in the game which increases resistance to all status ailments. Paladins can use it in a niche and effective build against status ailments in general, but that's something for another time, we're just covering basics here after all. The Caballaria's Sword is something you'll be way further down the road in your Paladin career before picking up, because you need 1200 job points spent to use it. Complementing its good base accuracy and its unique physical defense bonus effect, the Caballaria's Sword on its C path gives a massive HP boost of 320, increases cure potency by 20%, and gives a refresh effect of 3 per tick. If you recall how enmity loss works, the higher your maximum HP is, the less enmity you will potentially lose from taking damage, and this sword helps tilt that scale in your favour in a big way, especially when used with a Srivatsta to push the HP advantage even further. That substantial boost to cure potency cannot be understated, as it makes capping base cure potency trivial, and then allows the Paladin to optimise their build for both enmity generation and spell interruption rate down. The Moral Tuck, the highest quality version of the synthesis, is even better, but the price tag on the Caballarius is more reasonable. I've more than comfortably gotten by using this version of it. Pick it up as soon as you reach 1200 job points and get to work on it. You're free to use whatever food you want, but Paladins definitely have their favourites. Miso Ramen is familiar to most tanks already. It provides a good amount of extra HP and defense, but it's coveted for its magic evasion and magic defense properties above all else. I would use this if facing something which leans more towards magic damage and dangerous ailments, as it and the Prelude will give over 100 magic evasion together before any bar spell or bard carol. The second food to have around is a very recent addition, the Omelette Sandwich. This sandwich seems like it was made for Paladins, with HP and defense similar to the Miso Ramen, but that's when it starts going the other way. Instead of magic evasion and defense, it instead provides accuracy and enmity. The combination of these attributes on one food item is very unusual, but very welcome. This is my go-to in most content, as the sandwich and Enlight II help with accuracy a great deal. Your own equipment sets will inevitably differ from mine, so consider these hints rather than what to strictly adhere to. When gearing for a tanking build, you'll need to accommodate quite a bit, and ideally will need at least 2, potentially 3 variations. The first is what you're seeing now. It's my hybrid build, which caps damage taken reduction at 50%, caps enmity at 100 to meet the enmity loss reduction value, provides a large amount of HP and also gives good accuracy. The set has a lack of store TP and multi-attack, but that's something I get from a Corsair if I have one in my party. This is the set I spend most of my time in, as it covers all the essentials and does not result in my maximum HP bouncing back and forth between abilities and casting, which you will want to avoid wherever you can. The second set is my maximum turtle build, very similar to my hybrid but with more HP added to push it over 4000 HP with a food effect and close to 5000 HP with mantra from a monk active. This is a set I go into when things have gone south in a big way and I absolutely cannot die. The set has less accuracy than the hybrid and completely lacks any TP building attribute to support it, but that's just the price you have to pay when turning yourself into a brick wall. The set comes agonizingly close to the 700 shield skill mark with Reprisal active and when used with a Srivatsta. It could break it with some adjustments, but I'll look into that in the near future. Both of these sets will cost a fair bit of gil to get, largely due to the Odyssey pieces requiring maxing out, but they're well worth it. Your enmity set is very important. It needs to put in as much enmity plus as possible while also retaining damage mitigation and HP. My own set has 114 in it before adding the Crusade spell, which adds 30 enmity, taking my total to 144. The cap is 200, so it is uncapped, but it's still high enough outside of Sentinel to get the job done without major losses and other key attributes. It's still lacking a few pieces, but it's done the job for me well enough. The Bertgang Mythic Sword in particular would bring it very close to the cap, but that's a work in progress, and you can't reasonably expect a new player to have a Mythic out the gate. Sentinel's massive enmity boost will alleviate most enmity concerns, but since it's not a permanent benefit, you will need to fine-tune an enmity build of your own to account for the time it is down. You should always remember to factor in Crusade's 30 enmity when calculating your set, as it's very easy to keep up and it should always be up. When you have these first few sets sorted out, you will need to build another to stop spell interruption. If you cast your mind way back to my Blue Mage guide, this is not the first time I've touched on this topic and how important it is for a frontline caster. While Blue Mage occasionally finds itself under attack for multiple targets, it's to be expected as a Paladin, so getting this addressed is a priority. The value you need is 102% spell interruption rate down. 10% of this you'll get from merits, so you really need 92%, most of which you can get from 3 pieces of gear: the Sovereign Helm, the Founder's Hose, and the Odyssean Greaves. The rest you need to get in other slots while maintaining HP and damage reduction, much like your enmity build, but you'll also need to work in some enmity for certain spells. The next set you should focus on is your Cure build. It makes me despair when I see how many Paladins still do not have this crucial aspect of the job down, so I hope this will help you avoid being found lacking. The cap for Cure potency from equipment is 50%, and this used to be an unrealistic goal for Paladin, probably why so many neglected it, come to think of it, but there isn't an excuse anymore. You will need 2 sets for curing, with each being used for a specific situation. The first one is dedicated to maximum enmity generation when you are facing a single target. This is the set you're seeing now. When a battle is just between yourself and your target, your block rate and the shield mastery trait will prevent spell interruption. The second one should be similar to your first, but it needs to incorporate your spell interruption set as well, and it's to be used when dealing with crowds when you cannot afford interruption. Your group's success or failure could well depend on it. The Caballarius sword is instrumental in both of my builds, but if you're not using it, there are workarounds in other slots. The Sacro Gorget and the Macabre gauntlets, just to use 2 examples. Do not be worried about a lack of fast cast in your set, since Majesty and being magic haste capped, which you ideally should be, will take care of your recast timers. I really have to emphasize how important it is to have these two cure builds ready and to be interchangeable as your situation changes. No matter how hard you try to do your job as a tank, sometimes things just escalate beyond your control, at which point you basically double as a tank and as a combat medic. Perhaps some powerful AoE attacks have gone off which have downed the healers and the other parties of your alliance, the parties which contain the DPS of the group. If those DPS also go down, then your group could ultimately wipe entirely, so a Paladin might suddenly become the only thing preventing that by keeping the DPS alive. I mentioned super tanking earlier, and in case you don't know what that means, I'll give a quick rundown. Super tanking refers to the practice of a Paladin, or a tank generally speaking, holding crowds, taking as little damage as possible, while making absolutely sure not to get on the enmity list of anything around them, basically becoming an absolute brick wall. Seems a bit odd given all the talk of enmity in this guide, but there's a good reason. You see, if the Paladin does not have enmity registered, then neither will the group's healer register enmity if they have to cast on them. It's a common strategy for battles where crowds have to be controlled by the tank, while DPS peel individual targets and fight them away from potential danger by being in range of the larger crowd. Super tanking is not as prevalent as it once was. It doesn't work in ambuscade, some higher tier battlefields, and registering AoE Enmity is essential in events like Dynamis Divergence. Paladin is well suited to this tactic since it does not have to be actively fighting its target to block with their shield. There are some instances where it still works, and it pays to know how it does work. Registering enmity on multiple targets has been made simple thanks to Paladin being given Banishka as one of its spells. Banishka does very little damage, but that isn't its purpose. It's a means of registering enmity on a crowd. What you need to be careful of is the time between casting Banishka and performing another action to solidify yourself and everything's attention before a more vulnerable job draws it onto themselves and potentially gets themselves killed. I've seen this happen with a lot of white mages, unfortunately. You can use Reprisal for a quick spike in volatile enmity since it's a spell that can be self-targeted, but it will not last for long enough for crowd control like Horde Lullaby or Sleep Guard to be used perhaps. Alternatively, you can use one of your self-targeted abilities like Rampart or Palisade for a more reliable enmity spike. A great solution can be found from the Blue Mage Sub job. The Blue Mage Sub job has Cocoon to push your physical defense even further, though by then it's probably a moot point adding even more. Its true appeal is from its stellar enmity generation potential. Sheepsong has a quick casting time, short recast timer with capped haste, and has decent enmity values built into it, will instantly and safely put you on top of a crowd's enmity list without that precarious window between Banishka and another spell or ability. Jedatora is also great for enmity on multiple targets since it has a conal effect. Be sure to use your spell interruption set for both of them and use them often in group content where AoE enmity will be absolutely essential. I know what you're thinking if you're a new player. Blue Mage Sub, come on. Yes, it will be frustrating for a new player to get these spells, but persist and get it done. Another sub job I have experimented with and think has some potential is Dark Knight. Dark Knight sub on Paladin seems strange, but it has a bit to offer. Stun has the same enmity values as Flash, so by subbing Dark Knight you get another enmity tool. That's just one of the reasons Rune Fencers often sub Dark Knight. Poisonga might be a better means of registering enmity on multiple targets than Banishka as well, especially if they've already been slept and you do not want to wake them up and get someone in your group killed and make them very angry at you. Above all though, Dark Knight sub lets a Paladin get the most out of a greatsword through last resort. It seems counterintuitive using a greatsword, but if you're facing something which isn't really a threat physically and you want to help speed a fight along, then a greatsword will certainly get the job done. Generating enmity from conventional Paladin weapon skills in general is something that needs more investigation to determine whether or not it is a viable means of doing so. Weapon skills like Savage Blade can be made to do respectable damage, as I'm sure you know, but the lack of damage mitigation and the sharp HP drop in the weapon skills set has me uneasy. Rune Fencer gets away with it due to the fact it does not have to deal with the aforementioned HP fluctuation as much, and that greatswords are just better suited for the purpose of converting raw damage to enmity. It can be a forte of a seasoned Rune Fencer, but how well it could work on Paladin, I'm really not sure. I'll have to publish a follow-up when I'm more experienced in it. A better use for Paladin's weapon skills is to open skill chains for other DPS while retaining Enmity using all the tools you now know about. Paladin can work with any of the 4 level 2 skill chain properties with its sword alone. The only other job which can do that with its primary weapon alone is Samurai, so it's a strength you should play to. The issue you might face in doing this is the resulting skill chain damage will mean that the DPS closing the skill chains will be rising up the target's enmity list very quickly, so you need to keep on top of your own generation while keeping pace with TP. It's difficult to do this, especially when under-supported in an alliance, but if done properly, it's very effective. While the effectiveness of a Paladin's conventional weapon skills are questionable, it has one with a very unique effect which proves extremely useful. Atonement is a Paladin's mythic weapon skill obtained from Nazia Lyle and absolutely must be gotten before attempting any endgame content. When you first start using Atonement, you might wonder what the big deal is. It doesn't hit very hard, as you'll soon find. No, the real power of Atonement is what you do not see. That's come up quite a bit, hasn't it? Atonement is the only weapon skill in the game which has a static base enmity built into it, which means it behaves like a spell meant for enmity generation like Flash. At 1000% TP, it has almost double the cumulative enmity value of Flash, and slightly less volatile enmity is the same, but these values scale as TP rises, doubling when used at 3000%. Atonement's enmity generation can be increased with enmity equipment being used as its weapon skill set, so at 3000% and with 200 enmity in the set, you're looking at a colossal 5400 volatile enmity and 1800 cumulative enmity. Better still, if you eventually get the Burt Gang mythic sword and cap it to its fullest power, Atonement's base enmity is increased yet again, bringing it to a staggering maximum potential of over 8000 volatile enmity and 2700 cumulative enmity. Those are not small numbers. While plus 200 enmity is unrealistic outside of Sentinel, the TP gain rate isn't, given Enlight II's accuracy, TP gain from Shield Mastery and support from other jobs. Finally, to cap it all off, Atonement also gets around the problem of losing HP and damage reduction in the brief window it's used, since the set you use for it, your enmity set, will probably have both there in abundance. Atonement is an absolute godsend when fighting very dangerous targets and you need to maintain control while DPS are also at the enmity ceiling. In longer battles this is unavoidable unless the DPS in question are either in your party and you can cover them, or are Beastmasters, Dragoons or Ninjas. Cover working across an alliance would resolve this, but as it stands, Atonement is your best hope. Make very good use of it between all the other tools you have at your disposal. Just do your best with what you now know. Learn from your mistakes and keep going. That's all anyone can reasonably ask of you. Being a tank is tough in Final Fantasy XI, but it's also very engaging. Just give it your best shot. This brings me to the end of this guide. We've covered a great deal and did not go into everything Paladin can do. This has only been an introduction to the basics. Like I did with my Rune Fencer guide years ago now. Wow, that's really taken me back. I'll probably come back at some point and go over the more advanced aspects of Paladin. Before I go, I would like to give a shout out to Martel of the Ragnarok server for his contributions and impeccable fact checking. Righto, I'm signing out. I'll see you all next time.